Chapter 14, Hinds' Feet on High Places by Hurnard. The Place of Anointing. As it happened, the next thing which the shepherd had planned was very beautiful indeed. Not long after this conversation, the path finished its winding way through the valley and led them to the foot of the mountains on the other side, to a place where they rose up like a wall, far higher and steeper than the precipice of Injury. However, when Much Afraid and her two companions reached this place, they found the shepherd waiting for them beside a little hut. And lo, just where the cliffs were steepest and highest was an overhead cable suspended between that spot and the summit far above. On this cable hung chairs in which two could sit side by side and be swung right up to the top without any effort on their part at all. It is true that at first the very sight of these frail-looking aerial chairs swinging along so high above the ground made Much Afraid feel giddy and panicky. She felt she could never voluntarily place herself in one of them and be swung up that frightful-looking precipice, with only little footrest and nothing to prevent her casting herself out of the chair if the urge should come upon her. However, that passed almost at once, for the shepherd smiled and said, "Come, Much Afraid. We will seat ourselves in the front two chairs, and sorrow and suffering will follow in the next. All you have to do is to trust yourself to the chair and be carried in perfect safety up to the place to which I wish to take you, and without any struggling and striving on your part." Much Afraid stepped into one of the seats, and the shepherd sat behind her, while the two companions occupied the next pair. In a very minute, they were moving smoothly and steadily toward the high places, which had looked so impossibly out of reach, supported entirely from above, and with nothing to do but rest and enjoy the marvelous view. Though the chairs swung a little in places, they felt no giddiness at all, but went upward and still upward until the valley below looked like a green carpet, and the gleaming white peaks of the kingdom of love towered around and above them. Soon they were far above the place which they had climbed on the mountain opposite, and still they swung along. When at last they stepped out of the aerial chairs, they were in a place more beautiful than anything Much Afraid had seen before, though these were not the real high places of the kingdom of love. They had reached the borderland. All around were Alps with grassy meadows, almost smothered in flowers. Little streams gurgled and splashed between banks of kingcups, while buttercups and cowslips, violets and pink primulae carpeted the ground. Clumps of delicate purple soldanula grew in vivid clusters, and all over the fields, glowing bright as gems, were gentians, more blue than the sky at midday, looking like jewels on a royal robe. Above were peaks of pure white snow, which towered up into a cloudless sky like a roof of sapphire and turquoise. The sun shone so brilliantly, it almost seemed that one could see the flowers pushing their way up through the earth and unfolding themselves to receive the glory of its rays. Cowbells and goat bells sounded in every direction, and a multitude of bird notes filled the air. But above the rest was one voice louder and more dominant than them all, and which seemed to fill the whole region. It was the voice of the mighty waterfall, leaping down another great cliff which towered above them, and whose rushing water sprang from the snows in the high places themselves. It was so unspeakably lovely that neither Much Afraid nor her companions could utter a word, but stood drawing deep breaths and filling their lungs with the spicy, pine-scented mountain air. As they wandered forward, they stooped. They stooped down at every other step, gently touching the jewel-like flowers or dabbling their fingers in the splashing brooks. Sometimes they just stood still among the profusion of shining beauty around them and laughed aloud with pure joy. The shepherd led them across the meadow where the warm, scented grass grew nearly waist-high toward the mighty waterfall. At the foot of the cliffs they found themselves standing in cool shadows with the light spray sometimes splashing their faces. And there the shepherd bade them stand and look up. There stood Much Afraid, a tiny figure at the foot of the mighty cliffs, looking up at the great never-ending rush of waters as they cast themselves down from the high places. She thought that never before had she seen anything so majestic or so terrifyingly lovely. The height of the rocky lip over which the water cast themselves to be dashed into pieces on the rocks below almost terrified her. At the foot of the fall, the thunderous voice of the water seemed almost deafening, but it seemed also to be filled with meaning, grand and awesome, beautiful beyond expression. As she listened, Much Afraid realized that she was hearing the full majestic harmonies, the whole orchestra, as it were, playing the original of the theme song which all the little streamlets had sung far below in the Valley of Humiliation. Now it was uttered by thousands upon thousands of voices, but with grander harmonies than anything heard down in the valleys, yet still the same song. From the heights we leap and go to the valleys down below, always answering to the call to the lowest place of all. Much Afraid, said the shepherd's voice in her ear. What do you think of this fall of great waters in their abandonment of self-giving? She trembled a little as she answered, I think they are beautiful and terrible beyond anything which I ever saw before. Why terrible? He asked. It is the leap which they have to make, the awful height from which they must cast themselves down to the depths beneath, there to be broken on the rocks. I can hardly bear to watch it. Look closer, he said again. Let your eye follow just one part of the water from the moment when it leaps over the edge until it reaches the bottom. Much Afraid did so, and then almost gasped with wonder. Once over the edge, the waters were like winged things, alive with joy, so utterly abandoned to the ecstasy of giving themselves that she could almost have supposed that she was looking at a host of angels floating down on rainbow wings, singing with rapture as they went. She gazed and gazed and then said, "It looks as though they think it is the loveliest movement in all the world, as though to cast oneself down is to abandon oneself to ecstasy and joy indescribable." "Yes," answered the shepherd in a voice vibrant with joy and thanksgiving. "I am glad that you have noticed that, Much Afraid. These are the falls of love, flowing from the high places in the kingdom above. You will meet them again. Tell me, does the joy of waters seem to end when they break on the rocks below?" Again, Much Afraid looked where he pointed, and noticed that the lower the water fell, the lighter it seemed to grow, as though it were really lighting down on wings. On reaching the rocks below, all the waters flowed together in glorious host, forming an exuberant, rushing torrent which swirled triumphantly around and over the rocks. Laughing and shouting at the top of their voices, they hurried still lower and lower down through the meadows to the next precipice and the next glorious crisis of their self-giving. From there they would again cast themselves down to the valley far below. Far from suffering from the rocks, it seemed as though every obstacle in the bed of the torrent was looked upon as another object to be overcome and another lovely opportunity to find a way over or around it. Everywhere was the sound of water, laughing, exulting, shouting, and jubilation. "At first sight, perhaps the leap does look terrible," said the shepherd, but as you can see, the water itself finds no terror in it, no moment of hesitation or shrinking, only joy unspeakable and full of glory, because it is the movement natural to it. Self-giving is its life. It has only one desire, to go down and give itself with no reserve or holding back of any kind. You can see that it obeys that glorious urge. The obstacles which look so terrifying are perfectly harmless, and indeed only add to the joy and glory of the movement." When he had said this, he led them back to the sunny fields and gently told them that for the next few days they were to rest themselves there in preparation for the last part of their journey. On hearing these words, the last part of the journey, Much Afraid felt almost as though she would sink to the ground with happiness. Moreover, the shepherd himself remained there with them the whole time. Not for a single hour was he apart from them, but walked and talked with them. He taught them many things about the kingdom to which they were going, and it was as though grace flowed from his lips, and sweet ointments and spices were diffused wherever he went. How thankfully Much Afraid would have stayed there for the rest of her life. She would have cared not more about reaching the high places, had it not been that she still walked on crooked feet, still had a twisted mouth, still had a fainting heart. It was not, however, that the sun always shone. Even there, on the borderland of the high places, there were days of mist when all the gleaming peaks were completely blotted out by a curtain of cloud, so that if one had never seen them, it would have been impossible to be sure that they really existed and were round about, quite close at hand, towering high above the mist and clouds into the clear blue sky above. Every now and again, however, there would be a rent in the veil of mist, and then, as though framed in an open window, would appear a dazzling whiteness. For a moment, one of the vanished peaks would gleam through the opening as if to say, "Be of good courage. We are all here, even though you cannot see us." Then the mist would swirl together again, and the window in heaven would close. On one such occasion, the shepherd said to Much Afraid, "When you continue your journey, there may be much mist and cloud. Perhaps it may even seem as though everything you have seen here of the high places was just a dream, or the work of your own imagination. But you have seen reality, and the mist, which seems to swallow it up, is the illusion. Believe steadfastly in what you have seen. Even if the way up to the high places appears to be obscured, and you are led to doubt whether you are following the right path, remember the promise. Thine ears shall hear a word behind thee saying, This is the way, walk ye in it. When ye turn to the right hand, and when ye turn to the left, always go forward along the path of obedience, as far as you know it until I intervene. Even if it seems to be leading you where you fear I could never mean you to go. Remember, Much Afraid, what you have seen before the mist blotted it out. Never doubt the high places are there, towering up above you. And be quite sure that whatever happens, I mean to bring you up there, exactly as I have promised." As he finished speaking, another rent appeared in the curtain of mist, and one of the peaks of the high places, framed in blue sky, shone down on them. Before the curtain closed again, Much Afraid stooped down and picked up a few of the gentians growing near her feet, as a reminder of what she had seen. For, said she to herself, these actually grew on the lower slopes of the high places, and are an earnest that though the peaks may again become invisible, they are there all the time. On the last day they stayed there, the shepherd did a very wonderful thing. He took Much Afraid apart by herself and carried her right up to the summit of one of the high places. In the kingdom of love itself, he took her to a high peak, dazzling white, uplifted like great throne, with numberless other peaks grouped round about. Up there on the mountaintop, he was transfigured before her, and she knew him then to be what she had dimly sensed all along, the King of Love himself, King of the whole realm of love. He was clothed in a white garment, glistening in its purity, but over it he wore a robe of purple and blue and scarlet, studded with gold and precious gems. On his head he wore the crown royal. But as Much Afraid bowed herself and knelt at his feet to worship, the face that looked down upon her was that of the shepherd whom she had loved and followed from the very low places up to the heights. His eyes were still full of gentleness and tenderness, but also of strength and power and authority. Putting out his hand, Without a word, he lifted her up and led her to a place where on the topmost pinnacle of all they could look right out over the whole realm around them. Standing there beside him, and so happy as to be securely conscious of herself at all, Much Afraid looked out over the kingdom of love. Far, far below were the valleys and the plains and the great sea and the desert. She even thought she recognized the valley of humiliation itself, where she had lived so long and had first learned to know the shepherd. But that seemed so long ago, it was like remembering another existence altogether. All around her, in every direction, were the snowy peaks of the high places. She could see that the bases of all these mountains were extremely precipice, and that higher up they were all clothed with forests. Then the green slopes of the higher Alps, and then the snow. Wherever she looked, the slopes at that season of the year were covered with pure white flowers, through whose half-transparent petals the sun shone, turning them to burning whiteness. In the heart of each flower was a crown of pure gold. These white-robed hosts scented the slopes of the high places with a perfume sweeter than any she had ever breathed before. All had their faces and golden crowns turned down. The mountains, as if looking at the valleys, multitudes upon multitudes of them, which no man could number, like a great cloud of witnesses, all stooping forward to watch what was going on in the world below. Wherever the king and his companion walked, these white-robed flowers bowed beneath their feet and rose again, buoyant and unsullied, but exuding a perfume richer and sweeter than before. On the utmost pinnacle to which he led her was an altar of pure gold, flashing in the sun with such splendor that she could not look at it, but had to turn her eyes away at once, though she did perceive that a fire burned on it, and a cloud of smoke, perfumed with incense, rose from it. Then the king told her to kneel, and with a pair of golden tongs brought a piece of burning coal from off the altar. Touching her with it, he said, "Lo, this hath touched my lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged." Isaiah 6:7. It seemed to her that a burning flame of fire, too beautiful and too terrible to bear, went through her whole being, and Much Afraid lost consciousness and remembered no more. When she recovered, she found that the shepherd was carrying her in his arms, and they were back on the lower slopes of the borderland. The royal robes and the crown were gone, but something of the expression on his face remained, the look of utmost authority and power. Above them towered the peaks, while everything below was shrouded in clouds and mist. When he found that she was sufficiently recovered, the shepherd took her by the hand, and they walked together down into the white mist and through a little wood where the trees were scarcely visible. and there was no sound but drops of water splashing onto the ground. When in the middle of the wood a bird burst into song. They could not see it for the mist, but high and clear and indescribably sweet the bird sang and called, the same series of little notes over and over again. They seemed to form a phrase, constantly repeated, always with a higher chirp at the end, which sounded just like a little chuckling laugh. It seemed to Much Afraid that this was the song the bird was singing. He's gotten the victory, hurrah! He's gotten the victory, hurrah! The wood rang with the jubilant notes, and they both stood still among the dripping trees to listen. Much afraid, the shepherd said, "You have had a glimpse of the kingdom into which I am going to bring you. Tomorrow, you and your companions start on the last part of your journey, which will bring you thither." Then, with wonderful tenderness, he spoke words which seemed too glorious to be true. "Thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and hast not denied thy name. Behold, I will make thine enemies to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. Behold, I come quickly. Hold fast that which thou hast, that no man taketh thy crown. And she that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and she shall go no more out, and I will write upon her the name of my God. I will write upon her my new name." Revelation 3:8-12. It was then that Much Afraid took courage to ask him something which she had never dared ask before. With her hand held in his, she said, "My lord, may I ask you one thing? Is the time at last soon coming when you will fulfill the promise that you gave me?" He said very gently, yet with great joy, "Yes, the time is not long now. Dare to begin to be happy. If you will go forward in the way before you, you will soon receive the promise, and I will give you your heart's desire. It's not long now, Much Afraid." So they stood in the mist-filled wood, she trembling with hope and unable to say a word, worshipping and wondering if she had seen a vision or if this thing had really happened. Upon his face was a look which she would not have understood even if she had seen it. But she was too dazed with happiness even to look at him. High over the dripping trees, the little bird still sang his jubilant song. He's gotten the victory. And then a burst of trills and chuckles. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. A little later, they were down in the meadows, where Sorrow and her sister were waiting for their return. It was time to go forward on the journey, but after the shepherd had blessed them and was turning to go his way again, Suffering and Sorrow suddenly knelt before him and asked softly, "Lord, what place is this where we have been resting and refreshing ourselves during these past days?" He answered very quickly, "This is the place to which I bring my beloved, that they may be anointed in readiness for their burial." Much afraid did not hear these words, for she was walking a little ahead, repeating over and over again, "He said dare to begin to be happy, for the time is not long now, and I will give you your heart's desire."